In this video, I'm going to talk about the benefits of looking people and companies up for no dang reason. You may have looked people up if you met them and there was something about them that you were curious about. You may have looked up a company as you were preparing for an interview, or if you were looking at applying for a job at that particular company. But I look people up for no reason all the time, just because I'm curious. I don't have any particular plans as to what I'm going to use that information for, but I just like knowing. I like knowing who becomes an arborist, what kind of work they can do, how they approach the industry in ways that I'm perhaps not familiar with. There are benefits that I've gotten over the years from looking people up. I'm going to divide this video up into 3 sections, which is looking up the companies, because that's probably what you're most familiar with, then individual arborists and other people in or adjacent to the industry, and finally, arborist reports. The first category is companies. When I attended my very first tree climbing workshop, the host was the owner of a local tree service, and I thought he was really charismatic. So I looked them up, I asked for informational interview, and I also later asked if there was some kind of work that I could do with them. The company had really good marketing, they made themselves look super cool, and I wanted to be a part of that. That was not the actual situation. My impression was fairly naive, but while I was working at that company, I somehow got this idea in my head that I wanted to own a tree service one day. So I started looking up every single company whose trucks I saw drive by on the job. And I wanted to just see how they differed or how they were similar. And I remember this one day I distinctly remember being in some bushes because I was doing a tree inventory. I was in the bushes and I saw a tree truck drive by. That company, when I looked them up, they were the complete opposite of the company that I was working for. Once I got to look at his website and learn more about him and the way that he ran his business, I knew that I wanted to work for this guy. So I met him at some conferences and I asked a very targeted question about how I could convince a tree service owner to give me a chance to be on their crew, because I think having that crew experience is really important for consulting. He offered me an apprenticeship, and that's how I got into that company. That is the company that I worked for about 8 years until I went off on my own. This has brought me great success. After graduating, I basically convinced these tree companies to create positions for me. I don't know if that's because I was persistent and I very much was like, I want to work for you guys. I'm not just looking for a job. I want to work for you. And I happen to be an arborist. I happen to be very educated. And I think they kind of created positions for me. So your mileage might vary, but it was very beneficial for me. The next category of things to look up is people. You might already do this yourself to some extent. Perhaps you meet someone at an event and you get a business card or you get a name. Perhaps you see someone give a talk and you like what they're about and you look them up, or interviews, whatever. I'm making the case for general looking people up. I've done this in situations like the ASCA conference. They publish their attendee lists. I've also looked up people who volunteer for the same events that I do. Not necessarily so that I have something to talk to them about during that event, but eventually our paths will cross again, and maybe something that I was curious about is worth asking about at that particular time. Since college, I've done informational interviews, and these are like reverse interviews where you're not the one getting interviewed, you're interviewing someone else, but it's very informal. The goal is that you find out about them, learning about their job, some insider information that you might not get from a job listing or that you wouldn't get honestly in a job interview, because the employer's goal is to get you on board. It's not to tell you everything that's real about the job. The key points here are that it has to be genuine. You can't set something up like this with the ulterior motive of hoping that they will help connect you with a job or give you a job. That's not the point. You can also learn about certain resources that maybe this person knows about that is going to be a lot harder for you to find out about as an outsider. If they also mention something that you're specifically interested in, you can also ask them to connect you with someone specific or some organization, whatever it is. As an example, I've looked up people in advance of ASCA conferences. The ASCA conference is unique in that they do publish their attendee list, and I could see these are the people in my area. These are the consulting arborists that are on the Bay Area. And so I looked up their websites and I had questions for them. And I was able to talk to a few folks that I actually looked up, including an old mentor who was giving me a hard time because I just wrote his name down and I didn't write any questions. So he gave me shit for that. And I went back to the hotel that night and looked him up again and wrote some questions. And that was the start of our relationship. I still look people up now. I remember looking someone up at some point when the conference was in Texas. Then I ran into them at the ASCA Academy and I was like, why is your company so familiar? And it turns out I had looked them up before. If you're someone who is a little self-conscious about networking, sometimes it helps to have a little bit extra knowledge. People love to hear that someone has heard about them before, and as long as you're not doing it in a creepy way, it's like probably pretty flattering and not at all an issue. I do also want to be clear that when I'm looking people up, it's not for the purpose of comparison, of seeing whether they're a good arborist or a better arborist. It's not this measuring contest, because what you see as far as people's presence online is not necessarily going to be accurate. But you can get some ideas, like my friend has her values on her website and the values that she operates on. So I would look at that and I would think, whoa, this person's kind of curious. They're running their business in a unusual way. I might want to ask them about it at some point, and maybe that will inform the way that I want to do things. The last category of stuff to look up is arborist reports. Although I just said that you can't gauge an arborist based on their online presence, you can in certain situations if their arborist reports are published online. They might do it purposely on their own website, as an example, like a portfolio, or they submit their reports to a municipality who uploads it on their website. I usually see this with development, but it's going to depend on the city, whether they actually do that, and it's going to depend on the arborist if they do that kind of development work. But for any arborist, you can look up their full name in quotations and arborist report in separate quotations, and you can find a lot of information that way. If you ever end up working in a position where you're a contract arborist for a municipality where you peer review other arborist reports, you're going to get to see all these different reports without having to do this. But for the average person, give it a try. I've mentioned this idea to other arborists, not a lot, but it's surprising to me that none of them have done it before. Here are the benefits that I've gotten from it specifically. Number one is confidence. If you are not someone who is confident about your reports, perhaps that's because you don't have a mentor or you don't have anyone who can guide you or give good examples. You don't know where you stand necessarily as far as your report writing goes. You can get an idea of what other people put together. Even if this person is a board certified master arborist, even if they're a RCA, those reports can still be garbage. And if you are someone who, like me, has lower confidence relative to your actual skill, this can help you boost it to a more appropriate level. You can also get ideas from other people's reports. Maybe their reports are more comprehensive than yours. Maybe they say things in a way that is clearer, so you might get inspiration from it. There's an arborist in my area whose writing is creative in a good way. It's got character to it. And up till then, before I read his report, all my reports were dry, technical. And once I saw his, I thought, well, this is an effective report. I can be looser with my language. I don't have to make it sound like a scientific paper or something, you know? You may also be able to gauge the ethics and the objectivity of a particular arborist. I was looking up these reports and happened to find 2 public reports about the same tree. And it was like a landmark tree in San Francisco or something like that. You could tell that one arborist was being more objective, whereas the other was saying more what would be in support of his client. And if you were perhaps being mentored by or trying to work for the arborist who was more biased, then you would be able to tell that by looking at some of these reports ahead of time. Whether that affects your decision or not isn't the important part, but rather that you're aware that they have this bias or they have some ethics that might not necessarily align with yours. That same thing extends to peers as well. I have some arborist peers, and there are certain things about their work that I don't necessarily agree on. I might ask someone else instead who is more in alignment with me about certain things. This is not confirmation bias. As an example, if someone does sloppy work, there's no reason for me to go ask them for specifics about a particular city's requirements because they may not necessarily be meeting those requirements in their reports. Another thing that you might be able to figure out is unofficial or indirect city requirements for reports, specifically something like a development report. You may find that the requirements for an arborist report vary quite a bit from what you can actually see in a city ordinance. And unless you were to directly ask a planner or an arborist or whatever who's associated with the city, you might not actually get that information. And I'll just be honest, sometimes you can ask the staff these questions and they don't have answers for you. So what you could do is look up an arborist report associated with that city. You know, this report was accepted and this report included trees of this size, blah, blah, blah. So you can model your report after theirs. You might also get an idea of the wide range of report formats that might be out there, especially if you have gone to ASCA Academy and you learn the ASCA booklet format and you don't have people around you that can share different report examples. You might write every single report like a ASCA booklet format, booklet report, which is not necessary. So in looking people's reports up, you can see this is one page, this is how they presented the information. All of that can be really helpful to show the variety of work that's out there. So that is my case or my explanation for why I am always curious about people and why I actively will look into people, companies, people's arborist reports, things like that. I've done that in college and I'm going to continue to do it because I just am curious about people. And I like knowing a little bit about different people and having conversation points. You could call it creeping. I'm going to call it curiosity. It's all in your behavior and whether your behavior is professional or inappropriate.